Hello again, and welcome back to Educator.com's Introduction to PHP course. In today's lesson, we're going to go over how to set up your development environment. Specifically, we're going to talk about what development environments are, and then go over a couple of different kinds of development environments, one known as a remote development environment, and one known as a local. We're going to talk about the software that we're going to be using in this course for our development environment, and then we're going to go over a couple of concepts related to web servers and what's known as local development. Basically, we're going to be talking about the loopback IP address, and we'll explain more about that, as well as the localhost hostname. And we're also going to talk about the concept of a document root. We're also going to go over a description of the different kinds of text editors that are available, and go over our PSPad installation, which is the text editor that we're going to be using for this course. And then we're going to finish up with a section that provides some additional resources for finding help in setting up your development environment, and then also introducing our first homework challenge. So what exactly is a development environment? Well, essentially it's just a setup for a programmer to be able to write and test and debug their software. And what we've done for this course is we've chosen a default development environment setup that we're going to use throughout the course. And the reason for that is that unfortunately one of the biggest roadblocks to new PHP developers is actually just getting their development environment set up so that they can actually run PHP code and test it. Part of this reason is that PHP and Apache, which as we learned in the last lesson are two pieces that need to be configured to work together, two pieces of software that need to be configured to work together, can be quite difficult to do that. And so we're going to install some software for this course that's going to help ease that problem. For our default environment that we're going to be using, we're going to be running it on a Windows 7 platform. And the reason for that is I feel that that's the most popular operating system and will be able to reach most of the students out there. The idea being that you'll be able to mimic the steps that we take in this lesson so that you'll be able to get your development environment set up with as easy as possible. Additionally, we're going to be including software components as part of our development environment that have a couple of key features. We're selecting components that are free so that all the students will be able to download them. We're picking things that are easy to install and configure. And additionally, we're picking software that's available for most major operating systems. So even though we're going to be walking through the setup of the development environment on a Windows 7 machine, all the software that we're going to be using, except for the text editor, is available for most operating systems. So if you develop on a Macintosh or a Linux or Unix machine, you'll be able to get the same versions of the software they're going to be using. The text editor, as mentioned, is only available on Windows machines, but there are literally hundreds of text editors out there on the web, so doing a simple Google search should be able to find you with a compatible text editor that will work for use in this course. Additionally, the software that we've chosen is well documented. It has a large user base, so that there's a lot of information out there that will help you if you get stuck in configuring it. For example, if the default configuration that we set up in this course doesn't work for you. Additionally, the software that we're going to be using is actually software that's used in the real world. We're going to be using the latest version of PHP and also the Apache web server, which is the most common web server that's used in the world. The other thing to note is that the development environment we're going to be setting up for this course is going to be the same development environment that we're going to use in the advanced PHP course with some slight modifications. So for those of you that continue on in the PHP course sequence here at Educator.com, you'll be able to continue to use that same development environment without having to reinstall everything over again. So one thing I want to talk about first is there's a thing known as remote development and local development. Basically, remote development refers to where a programmer develops their code or their websites, their PHP pages on their local machine, and then the way that they test them is by uploading them, typically via FTP, to a remote server where they can be run and be tested. Now, we learned in our last lesson that in order to basically view and to serve PHP pages, we need three pieces of software. On the client side, we need a web browser to request the web page to be viewed. On the server side, in this case it's called the remote server, we need the Apache web server, that's able to serve HTML documents, and also is able to pass on, if PHP files are requested, those requests to the PHP interpreter. So the PHP interpreter can generate HTML output, pass it back to Apache to pass it back to the client. So in order to basically be able to serve and view PHP pages, we need a web browser, the Apache web server, and the PHP interpreter. Additionally, for development, we need a way to code our text files or our PHP files that we're going to be using. And so we need a fourth piece of software that's going to be a text editor. And basically, the way it works in a remote development environment is that typically the web browser and text editor are on your local machine, and the remote server contains the web server and the version of PHP running that's going to generate your dynamic web pages. So what happens is you'll create some PHP file on your local machine, for example, a .php file, and then what you'll do is you'll typically use FTP to upload that PHP file to your web server. Then, in order to test the software, you're going to open up your web browser, create an HTTP request for the particular PHP file that you're wanting to test, and then the typical process for loading a PHP file occurs. Apache is going to let PHP know that a PHP file has been requested. PHP will load it from the hard drive, parse it, generate HTML, which will pass back to Apache, which Apache then forwards onto the client. And this is basically the scenario that happens for those of you that have been web developers before that have a web host. Typically what you do is you develop your HTML files on your local computer, you upload them to your web host, maybe to a temporary directory, and then view them there to test them out. So this is an example of remote development. What we're going to be doing in this course is setting up a scenario for a local development or a local development environment. And what you can see is that over here we actually don't have this remote machine involved anymore. All of the software that we have that we had in the remote development environment we're still going to have, but it's all going to be run on our local development machine. So on our whatever computer you're developing on, your Windows 7 machine, we're going to have the Firefox web browser software installed. We're going to install the Apache web server. We're going to have PHP installed, and then we're also going to have a text editor installed. So what happens is basically there's a number of benefits to doing this, and a lot of it has to do with increasing your efficiency as a developer, because now when you create a PHP file in your text editor on your local machine, instead of having to FTP it across the internet to Apache, that FTP simply becomes a local save file to your hard drive. Because your Apache server is running on your local computer, Apache and PHP just need to load that file from the local hard drive, so we don't need that FTP operation, and we eliminate one of the network basically interactions that takes time. It takes time to upload files via FTP. Additionally, when we want to test a file, we don't actually have to go out on the internet. We just point our browser at our local Apache server, and it's still going to generate an HTTP request, but it's not going to go out over the internet. It's going to be stay local within your computer, so that again eliminates another network connection that you have. Sort of another added benefit of this is that by having your web server and PHP all on your local development machine, you can actually develop while you're offline, while you're not connected to the internet, because you don't need to be able to FTP to a remote server, nor do you need to connect to a remote server to test your pages. The other sort of benefit that you get from having these things installed locally is that you have access to all of the configuration files. For example, for the Apache server and for the PHP interpreter, you have access to those configuration files. Whereas, for example, if you are using a web host and have a shared web hosting account, you may not be able to alter the PHP configuration. Now, because we're going to be developing, we may want to set some configuration settings that will be useful for development, so we want to be able to make those changes. And also, as we're learning PHP, we're going to be changing some of these settings, and by having that configuration file that we can edit on our local machine, we'll be able to experiment with different settings, and it'll help us in learning PHP and how to do PHP development. So the software that we're going to be using in this course, basically it's 4 pieces of software we talked about: a web browser, Apache, PHP, and a text editor. For the web browser, we're going to be using Firefox, which is an open source web browser that's free, and we're going to be using it. One of the main reasons we're using it is because it has an add-on called Firebug, which basically adds a bunch of web developer tools to the browser that make it easier to do web development, and also we'll be able to use to help us diagnose problems with our PHP scripts. For example, when we get into dealing with input data from HTML forms, such as something known as get input data. So actually, if we go and take a look, I've already installed Firefox, and basically this is the link provided on that slide, which will also be provided in quick notes, to where you can download Firefox. You simply click on the download link. It's going to pop up a window, allow you to download an executable file, and you simply run and install it just as you would any other Windows application. It's a pretty straightforward and quick process. Now, to install the Firebug add-on, that's actually something you do directly from Firefox. And the way you do that is you go to the Firefox menu, you click on the add-ons option, and Get Add-ons is going to load up. In the Search Add-ons box, you simply type Firebug. What that does is searches all of the available plugins and add-ons that are available for Firefox, and we can see that Firebug pops up as one that's available. So we simply click on the Install button. What it's going to do is it's going to actively just download that add-on in real time. It's basically already installed it in this short amount of time, and then it asks you to restart Firefox in order for the changes to take effect. So if we click on Restart Now, wait a couple seconds while the browser reloads. And actually, you can see that it already has. And what you'll notice, actually, it's kind of subtle, but in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, you'll notice this little bug that if you click on, it opens up sort of this tool panel at the bottom, and this is what Firebug is. It's a panel of different tools that allow you to sort of diagnose and basically figure out problems that are going on with your web application. And so that's how you know it's successfully installed, as a little bug appears down here, and you can go ahead and close that by clicking on the bug again. So that's Firefox and the installation of the Firebug add-on. The other piece of software we're going to be installing is actually a software distribution. It's called XAMPP. And what it is it's a combination of a number of different pieces of software that are basically combined together in one distribution and basically set up so that they're easy to configure with one another. In particular, XAMPP contains PHP, in this case for the version we're going to be using, 1.7.4. It contains PHP version 5.3.5, and it contains the Apache web server version 2.2.17. So what we do is we simply download this software distribution. It's going to contain Apache, it's going to contain PHP, along with a number of other different pieces of software. For example, it's also going to include the MySQL database. And what it does is it also provides some configuration files that makes it easy for you to get Apache and PHP set up to work together. And that's one of the main reasons that we're using this software distribution, is because getting Apache and PHP to work together can be a very difficult task. Also, the other piece of software that we're going to be using, as mentioned, is the PSPad text editor, and it's a Windows-based text editor, and it can be accessed at this link. You simply go and download the executable file and run it just like you did for Firefox. It's pretty simple. For XAMPP, it's going to be a little bit different. There's a couple of different options available at this link, which again will be available in the quick notes. I'm going to have you download the zip archive and not the exe file. And actually, we're going to walk through that XAMPP installation now. So the first thing for the XAMPP installation is actually, let's go look at the XAMPP website. It's actually at a website called apachefriends.org. We want XAMPP for Windows. And if you scroll down this page, blow it up a little bit, you can see the different downloads. There's going to be a Windows installer and then a zip file. And what we want is we want to install the zip archive. We want to download the zip archive. And I've already actually downloaded that. And the first thing that you do is we're going to unzip that basically that software distribution. Now, I've actually already gone ahead and done that because it takes a while. It's a pretty large file. It takes a while to unzip all of the contents. But for this course, we're going to unzip that XAMPP software distribution into a directory called XAMPP, and you should put it in your Windows user directory. The reason for that is related to permissions. We could install it in the program files directory or maybe on the root hard drive, for example, the C drive. However, because one of the things we mentioned that we want to be able to do as new developers is to play with the configuration files. If you install, for example, the XAMPP distribution in the program files directory, you run into problems when trying to edit the configuration files. You run into permissions issues. Typically, that can be avoided by placing the XAMPP distribution within your user directory because you have full read and write permissions, which will allow us to pretty easily change the configuration for PHP and if we need to, Apache as well. So you unzip the file into an XAMPP directory in your user directory, and then the next thing you do is you run this setup script or a batch script that XAMPP provides for you that's going to get everything basically configured and set up to work together. So if we go to where Educator1 is the name of our user directory on this computer, we've actually gone ahead and unzipped the XAMPP distribution into the XAMPP directory. And you can see here this is the contents of the XAMPP distribution. And what we're going to do is run the file called setup_xampp.bat, and that's a batch file that's going to basically set up XAMPP on your computer. So if we go ahead and click on that, what's going to happen is a Windows command prompt is going to prop up, and you may or may not be able to see the text in this window, but it basically says, in this case, that it was successfully installed and configured, and press any key to continue. So if we go ahead and do that, XAMPP is properly set up on this computer. Now, that being said, the next step that you're going to take is to verify that the installation actually works, because there can be some problems that occur. So the first thing that you do is you start XAMPP, and you do that by running a file called xampp-control.exe in the XAMPP directory. So if we go ahead and go to our XAMPP directory, and we double-click on xampp-control.exe, this sort of control panel for XAMPP is going to pop up. And you can see it's got a number of different buttons on here. The first one is a start button that relates to Apache, that relates to the Apache web server. So the next step that we're going to take when we start XAMPP is to go ahead and click the start button next to Apache so that our Apache server will be up and running, because we need that to basically serve files locally on our computer. So assuming everything works right, you'll see a little message here that says running that lets us know that Apache is up and running. And one recommendation I would have would be to put a shortcut somewhere to this xampp-control.exe, for example, on your taskbar, so that it's easy to access, because when we're changing configuration files, you're going to want to be able to access that to start and stop Apache. The next step that we're going to do to, now that Apache is started and we know that that was successful, if it wasn't, we would have got some sort of error message. We're going to open our browser and browse to this address, http://127.0.0.1. And what that is it's basically we're saying we want to view the contents of the root of a web server at this IP address here using the HTTP protocol. And if XAMPP was installed successfully and Apache works correctly, we actually should see a splash screen appear. So if we go to our web browser, we open a new tab and we go to http://127.0.0.1, and we click enter. Oops, looks like I mistyped HTTP. We click enter. We see the XAMPP splash screen that's going to allow you to select a language, and for this course we're going to be using English, so we click the English link. And what comes up basically is the XAMPP control panel. And this is actually another one of the advantages of using a software distribution like XAMPP, is it provides a control panel that allows you to basically configure and play around with the different pieces of software that come with it, especially things besides Apache and PHP, like your MySQL database and so forth. So now we know that our XAMPP distribution is up and running. So if you get to this point, you know that you've successfully installed XAMPP and your Apache server is working correctly. Now, what you'll notice from the last slide is that we actually went to the address 127.0.0.1, which is an IP address. And it's known as a LOOPAC IP address. And basically what it does is when you type that in your web browser, basically your computer knows that when you go to that address, it's not actually going to search for a computer on the network that has that IP address. It knows that that address refers to itself, basically the local computer. So when you type that address in your web browser, your computer is going to know that it means I want to look for a web server that's running on my local machine, so it's going to look for a local Apache web server. Now, one other way to refer to this IP address is using the host name localhost. And localhost is a name you can type in your browser. It works like domain name, for example, just like Amazon.com does. Whereas Amazon.com using DNS actually translate to a specific IP address, and it's an IP address that the computers actually use to communicate, but you can access it in your web browser by typing Amazon.com. In that same way, we can actually use localhost and type that host name in our browser, and that's going to refer to this loopback IP address as well. And for the remainder of this course, we're always going to be using localhost to refer to our local web browser rather than the loopback IP address. And we're going to do that for pretty much the same reason why when you go to Amazon.com you don't type in the IP address. The domain name or the host name is easier to remember than the IP address. Now, because those refer to the same, basically refer to the same IP address, localhost refers to 127.0.0.1. If we go back to XAMPP or to our web browser and we type http:// and type localhost this time, what we should be able to do is load our local web browser, or make a request to our local web browser, and if we hit enter, we can see that that actually happens. So localhost and 127.0.0.1 both refer to our local machine with Apache running on it. Now, one thing I want to talk about is a term called a document root. And basically what a document root is it refers to a folder on your local hard drive that contains all of the files that are accessible via your web server. Basically, only files that are served that are contained in a web server's document root or its subfolders are typically accessible via the web server. So for example, for those of you that have worked with WebHost before, maybe your document root was named something like public_HTML or www. And basically what your web hosting provider would tell you would say, any files that you want to be made available on your web server, you put them in these directories. For example, every file on your computer is not available via your web server. Only basically files that are put in these specific directories, basically the document root or its subfolders, are available via the web server. For Apache, in the XAMPP installation, the document root is a folder named htdocs that's located in the XAMPP root installation folder. So for example, if we go and look at our XAMPP directory, we can see there's an htdocs folder, and basically anything that we want to be able to test, that we want to be able to view through the Apache server, which is going to be all of our PHP files, need to go in this directory or below it. So what I'm actually going to do is create a folder that we're going to be using throughout this course to contain example files and the web application we're developing, and I'm going to call it intro to PHP with the number 2. So basically I've created a new directory within our document root, and then I'm going to use PSPad, which we haven't talked about yet, but is a text editor that we're going to be using for this course, to create a simple HTML file. It's going to be a bare bones file that just has the HTML and body tags, as well as a header tag. And we're just going to include a header that says some message. We'll call the file sample.html, so we're going to say this is sample.html. Jeez, typing's off. So when we go ahead and try to save this file using the save as command, we're going to browse to the htdocs folder in our XAMPP directory, and within that we're going to browse to the intro to PHP folder, and we're going to save this file as sample.html. So now if we go back and we look at our intro to PHP file, we have this sample.html file here. Well, because this directory, intro to PHP, is contained within our document root, the files within it are accessible via our web server, so we can use a web browser to access them. So, because localhost, when you go to the localhost directory, or when you go to the localhost and just look at the root directory, basically what it shows you is the contents of the document root. Well, we're not interested in the document root. We're interested in the sample.html file in the intro to PHP directory within the document root. So we're actually going to type the URL intro to PHP / sample.html. And as you remember when we talked about URLs, everything after the host name is a path. So basically we're saying that we want to find the sample.html file in the intro to PHP directory that's within the document root of our web host. And if we go ahead, in this case our local web server, if we go ahead and browse to that page, we can see that our web page loads up. And if we look at the code, we can see that load up some. We can see the source code that we typed. And so that's basically how URLs map to files in your local file system. So in this example, sample.html contained in the intro to PHP directory, contained in the htdocs directory, is accessible via localhost / intro to PHP / sample.html. And so that's how URLs basically map to files within the file system. And also, this is typically how local development is going to go. Is you're going to be creating a text file in your text editor. You're going to be saving it somewhere within the document root, in this case into the intro to PHP folder, and then using your web browser, you're going to browse to it using localhost to see if it works as is expected. So now I just want to talk a little bit about text editors. Basically, to code PHP files are just essentially plain text files. And there are a number of different text editors out there which you can do that. And there's sort of a spectrum of text editors. On one end you have, for example, Windows Notepad, which is basically a bare bones text editor. It just allows you to basically create a text file and save it. On the other end is something like XenStudio, which is an IDE or an integrated development environment. And what that does is that is sort of like a text editor on steroids. It provides all sorts of additional features in addition to just being able to edit text files. For example, it allows things like code completion, code refactoring. It might include some debugging tools or some build tools. What we're going to be using is PSPad, which is somewhere in the middle of the spectrum, and it's actually more towards the bare bones end. And essentially PSPad is a bare bones text editor with a few little features added on top of it that we're going to make use of. However, one thing to note is that we're not using XenStudio or any of the IDEs that are available out there, and there's a specific reason for that. And that's because these IDEs, while very powerful and they can really make a programmer's life much easier by doing things automatically, that's part of the problem. Is, for example, it will do things automatically for you behind the scenes. And as a new programmer to PHP, we want to really know what's going on, and we want to be able to do everything ourselves. So we can really learn how it's going on. If we use the IDE, it's going to be doing things, and we're not really going to be understanding what's going on, which is why we've chosen sort of a more bare-bones text editor. Now that said, once you become an experienced PHP programmer, it'll be great to move to the IDE, and that's what professional programmers use, because you'll allow it to basically do mundane tasks that you understand how they work, but are basically sort of a pain to do. Let them do it for you. We need to sort of work through those pains in order to see what's actually going on behind the scenes to learn how things work. So TextPad is installed, as mentioned before, just by downloading a exe file from pspad.com, and you're going to download the Windows installer. And when you install it, you just run through it like a typical installation, and this is what PSPad is going to look like when you open it up. Now there's a couple of things to note. One is it has sort of the sidebar here that you can disable if you want more screen real estate, and you simply do that by clicking on this tool panel button in the view bar. Additionally, we're going to be debugging our PHP application, so we're often going to want to know the line numbers of where errors occur. So there's actually an icon in the menu bar at the top over here that when you click on it, it goes ahead and it shows the line numbers of pages. So that might be something that you want to do. Additionally, and the main reason that we've chosen PSPad is the additional feature that it provides on top of like a Windows Notepad is what's known as syntax highlighting. And basically what that does is provides visual cues to you as the programmer as to make your files easier to read and to see if you made mistakes. So for example, this file sample.html that we have right now has been saved. It doesn't have any syntax highlighting. Everything looks the same. It's all the same color. However, if we go down here and we click on text at the bottom of the screen, PSPad allows us to pick basically a syntax to view the file in. So if we click on HTML, we can see that now the, actually let me go ahead and blow up the text size here. You can see that it's color-coded our tags, which basically provides visual cues of that you're using one tag over another. And then also, for example, let's say we improperly close this H1 tag. Well, now it turns red, and so that provides you a visual cue as a programmer that, hey, you've made a mistake in your code, and you can go back and correct it. And so that's basically the advantage of using PSPad, and is why we've chosen that as sort of this added feature. So now I just want to talk about finding help if you get stuck in setting up your development environment. As mentioned, it can be kind of complicated setting things up, and if things don't go as smoothly as they have in this lecture, I want you to be able to have some resources available to go out on the internet and be able to find ways to help you solve your problems. Fortunately, there's abundance of resources on the web. Two useful ones, and these links will be in the quick notes as well, are for the first one is for the PHP manual, and this is to the installation instructions on the manual, and then also the link to the documentation for the Apache web server. Additionally, often a quick Google search will direct you to the answers that you might need. And one thing I want to note is that one of the more common problems in getting Apache up and running and to run locally on your machine is if you have another program, basically what's called, that's already bound to port 80. As we had learned that a web server takes HTTP requests by listening on port 80. And so if you have a program that only one program on a computer can be bound to that port at the same time, so if you have another program that might already be bound to that, when Apache tries to start, it's going to have problems. So that's one of the more common problems. So now I'm going to introduce your first homework challenge. And basically the first thing I want you to do is go through and complete and verify the setup of your PHP development environment just like we did in the course. And then I want you to go ahead, and after you've seen the splash screen and seen that everything works, go ahead and stop Apache and XAMPP. And that'll give you practice with stopping and starting those two, because that's something you're going to be doing often. Then I want you to use PSPad to create a file named sample.html that contains whatever random HTML markup you want. And then I want you to save it in the appropriate folder on your computer so that you can browse to it at this URL here. So you're going to have to understand what we talked about when we talked about the document root and where the document root is on the XAMPP installation so that you can view this file successfully. And then I want you to go ahead and attempt to view sample.html at this address. And assuming you followed step 2 above, the XAMPP and Apache are going to be turned off. So you're going to get an error saying that you can't actually make a connection to 127.0.0.1. So then what I want you to do is go ahead, restart XAMPP and Apache, and then verify that you can successfully view that sample.html page. And that's going to give you practice learning how basically files on your local hard drive map to URLs in the web browser. And then also I just want you to verify that you can view that same file using the local host name as opposed to the IP address. And that's the common convention that we're going to be using throughout the rest of this course. So that ends today's lesson. Thank you for watching Educator.com. Look forward to seeing you next time.